Owning a dental practice is all but a guaranteed success, with the SBA noting failure rates as low as 2% after 15 years of ownership. That same 15-year time frame shows a failure rate of over 75% for all other businesses. So if dental practices are such a successful business model, then why do as many as 80% of partnerships fail? I think there are three dominant reasons that account for most of those failures. Welcome to the Next Level Executive Podcast, a show dedicated to dentists who want to evolve from a clinician who owns a practice into an executive who leads a business. I'm your host, Perrin. If you own a practice that generates over $1 million in revenue and you're wondering what's next, you're in the right place. We've all heard that experience is often the best teacher. I know it has been for me, and I've referenced some of that in prior episodes. I've also had a ringside seat as a consultant for other partnerships that had failure baked in their collective cakes. And I've also seen a few that dissolved before they got started as we dug into, quote, issues of alignment, end quote. Believe it or not, I look at those who failed to consummate a partnership at the onset as being successful. Success because they learned early on that it would never work, so they didn't invest the time, the money, and the emotion into what was destined for failure. I wish someone had done the same for me back in 2016. I've either been part of or been a consultant to partnership failures, partnerships that didn't go the distance, or partnerships that became an intractable problem due to lack of trust and an abundance of acrimony. Some of the outcomes I've seen range from simple capitulation, where both parties wave the white flag and go their separate ways, to both being willing to burn down the other's house so that neither wins at the expense of the other. If there's one major difference I can contrast from my personal experience to those of my clients, it is the following. Mine were all service businesses with no debt and no real personal contractual commitments, whereas your businesses have both with much longer term obligations. Put another way, I could get out quickly due to fewer complications and repercussions. You can't. And the reason you cannot means there's dramatically deeper downside risk to each and every one of you in getting a partnership wrong. In the world of dentistry, most partnerships really don't start out as equal, where two co-founders actually come together to start a practice from the beginning. That does happen occasionally, but the vast majority of partnerships evolve from where a senior founder brings on an associate and eventually allows that associate to buy into his or her business. Regardless of the cap table being 80-20 or 60-40 or even 50-50, God forbid, there's a dramatic difference in leadership and ownership experience that looks more like 100-0 or maybe 90-10 at best. I know this point is obvious, but in my experience, it's overlooked almost 100% of the time. It's one of the critical mistakes I made, or I should say we made, at the onset of my first company. I said in a previous episode of this podcast that we paid a law firm a large sum of money for our operating agreement, and I also said it turned out to be worth less than nothing because no one counseled us on the things we didn't know and the questions we didn't have the experience to ask. I say it was worth less than nothing because I actually had to pay a king's ransom to get out of it. For those of you founders in the audience, which is most of you, you make business ownership look really easy because your associate wasn't with you in the early days when you were fighting for your life. Remember those days when you brought home very little income because you had to make payroll the next week? Where was your associate when you had to break that news to your spouse? Probably nowhere to be found, right? So this brings me to the first key takeaway of the episode. Your associate has a complete lack of understanding when it comes to how to make decisions on taking cash out of the business. They think if it's in there, it should be distributed. Whereas you probably think, I've seen some lean days in my time, so we probably ought to have some cash reserves. Conflict over cash is the biggest hurdle to overcome in a partnership because a young partner only knows how much they borrowed to buy in, and they have a short-term mindset on what it takes to make the monthly payment. Period. End of story. If you don't educate them along the way on how a business truly operates, then they see distributions as an entitlement, whereas you see it as an added benefit or even, dare I say, a bonus. If we can somehow get beyond running the business with no fallback reserves, then we get to a second major point of failure, which is misalignment on what we're trying to build and the risks involved to do it. Look, everybody loves to talk about vivid visions and dreaming the big dream, but those dreams aren't nearly as pleasant when you're signing a personal guarantee on a loan, are they? Again, all of you founders know exactly what I'm talking about. That point where you feel like you're going all in on something and you jokingly tell your spouse that, honey, I'm worth more dead than I am alive. Visionary entrepreneurs are wired differently than the vast majority of the population. A visionary, especially one who's been working in the business for a longer period of time, can see the future unfolding and they get comfortable with the risk involved to bring it to reality. If you're one of those founders, are you expecting your young associate who's just starting out a family and probably buying their first home to actually share in your same risk profile? If they own more than 20% of your business, then the likelihood is the bank is going to require them to co-sign the loan to buy that next practice. And if they don't want to, then what happens to your dream? What happens to your vivid vision? This misalignment on growth and risk is key takeaway number 2 for this episode. It obviously starts with you. Are you crystal clear on what you want to build, how quickly you want to build it, and why you're willing to risk so much to do it in the first place? A founder's vision typically doesn't have a lot of clouds in the forecast, so if yours does, then it might be time to go back to the whiteboard. On the other hand, if you do have a clear vision for the future, my advice is to spend ample time with your potential partner and talk through the risks involved and the change you'll both be asked to lead in order to pull it off. These are heady conversations, and you are the only one qualified to lead them. So before I get to key takeaway number 3, I'll share a small part of my own vision with you as it relates to the relaunch of this podcast. One of my early stage goals is to get to 50 5-star reviews on Apple and 25 5-star reviews on Spotify within the first 60 days. So technically that's by the end of July 31st. I'm at 32 5-star ratings on Apple and 12 on Spotify as of this recording. So if you value the content I'm sharing, please scroll down in the app on your phone and tap the 5-star button. Your rating helps the show get ranked for others who are searching for this kind of content. So if my thought leadership makes a difference for you, then just know that your rating makes a very big difference for me. Honestly, one of the other things that keeps me going are the actual reviews themselves. Like when one listener, Kyle, referred to the podcast as, quote, the most authentic, genuine, and inspiring podcast in the world of dentistry. I'm 99.99% sure I know which Kyle that was, and I'm really grateful for his quality review there. And it's praise like Kyle's that tells me my thought leadership lands well with each of you. I'm grateful for it, so I hope you'll leave a rating and a review too. The goal is 50 5-star ratings by July 31st. So, back to the lecture at hand. If the use of cash and misalignment on risk are the first 2 points of failure in partnerships, then what's left for number 3? My answer to that would be, well, everything. Yeah, that's right. The third key takeaway in this episode is the associate's failure to embrace an administrative role at a lower comp rate or possibly no comp at all than what they're currently making as a full-time clinician. Look at yourself for a quick second. For the total amount of income you made out of the business last year, how much was attributed to your clinical work and how much was left that compensated you for everything else you did administratively? You can probably do the math pretty quickly on this. And if you did, let me guess. You made a lot more as a clinician than you did as an owner, didn't you? So why don't you just stop doing all of that administrative work and focus on clinical services only? Well, Perrin, the simple answer is because the administrative work has to get done to run the business. Somebody's got to do that. The work doesn't take care of itself. I know how much you love that administrative workload, but it's safe to say that your new partner or soon-to-be new partner should shoulder some of it if you're going to continue to grow the business. And if that administrative workload takes progressively more time, which I think it's reasonable to conclude that it would, then they're not going to be able to work a full clinical schedule. And that means their income will most likely go down, just like yours did. But you made that decision because you wanted to invest your time and your income back into the business to grow it so that it would yield greater income and greater valuation in the future, right? Of course. That's why we all make these time, effort, and dollar expenses investments into our business for a bigger future. Look, this makes perfect sense to me, but I bet it makes 0 sense to your associate. They've never owned a business. They've never tilled the soil to plant the seeds for the future harvest. They've never had to feed the goose that lays the golden eggs. The third point of failure here occurs when you have a 25% partner in your business, but you're still shouldering 100% of the administrative burden to keep the business moving in the right direction. Do they even know all the hats you guys and gals wear outside of your clinical role? Maybe more importantly, how many of those hats have you prepared them to wear? My guess is not many. The use of cash, alignment on risks, and all other duties as assigned are the 3 primary points of partnership failure that I've seen or personally experienced most often. My guess is that you're probably pretty well versed in all of them. My guess is also that your associate is well versed in none of them, and therein lies your challenge. If these sound like the challenges you're imminently going to face in your business, we just started a 90-day exploratory process this week into all of them and many more in the executive program. My question is, why aren't you in it with us? Our first group discussion session is probably the day after you listen to this episode, Friday, July the 10th. It's not too late to join if you're interested. So if you are, please reach out directly and I'd be happy to help you out with that. Now, I said I get more questions on associates and partnerships than any other topic, and that's true. But the assumption at the root of the question is that the associate is actually the right person to become a partner. Let me put that another way. Why do so many associates never measure up to being worthy of partnership in the first place? Probably because you recruited the wrong person and you did it out of a desperate attempt to fill a hole that another associate abruptly vacated. You fixed your short-term problem, all right, but you're about to create a bigger, long-term problem in the process. Maybe it's time we rethink our entire recruiting process. Want to know where to start? There's another episode coming. If you're wondering what's next for you and your business, the answer's waiting for you on the Next Level Executive Podcast.
This podcast was edited by Resonate Recordings.